the show we have two amazing women which I'll be interviewing. Later on we'll be speaking with Ursula Cettolin, who's a singer-songwriter. But right now we have Susanne McQuie with me in the studio. Susanne, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Nikki. It's great to be here.
Now Susanne, you were born in Austria, you lived in Germany, and you now live here in Australia. How did that all come about? Tell me about your journey.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a traveller, and it started, when I was really young. My parents actually lived in Munich in Germany, but my mum originally came from Austria. So when she was about to have me, she went back to my grandfather's farm, who was in the mountains, and I was born in the same little room that she was born, and many of her siblings as well. But of course, then they went back to Germany when I was a few weeks old, and then later on I got married to my husband, what brought me over to Australia.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about your life in Germany, Susanne, because I know that you actually had, as a young girl, had a stuttering problem. So tell me how that all came about.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a mystery actually really how it happened, but I reckon there were probably a few things that contributed to it. One of them was that my parents were really young when I was born. Like my dad was 18, my mum was 21.
Right.
So my dad was still in apprenticeship, and they really hadn't started to save up for life and to start a family. It was a little bit of a surprise, big surprise. And so they tried to make the best out of the situation, and I grew up with my grandmother for the first 3 years. What was probably the next to the ideal situation is just that she lived 50 kilometers away from Munich, so I only saw my parents on the weekend. Okay. And I stayed with my grandmother the rest of the time. And just from what I was told, it was really hard for me as a child, because there was this constant change between being with my grandmother and then being ripped away from her, being with my parents, and again the constant change. And when I was 3 years old, I moved back to my parents' place, because by then they had established themselves, but also it was apparent that it was very troubling to me as a child. So I moved in with my parents and went to kindergarten all day long, what I had to do because my parents had to work. Okay. And then when I was 6, my father died, what was very, very hard for my mom, because basically with 27, she was a widow with a little 6-year-old girl. And so I think it was probably a variety of those things who really led to the stuttering. Even I must say later on, after I really encountered God, I had someone with a word of prophecy, and they actually said that when I was in my mother's womb, that actually the umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck, and I was struggling for life. So I felt that was a big contribution to that as well. So I started stuttering when I was 4. And then went to a school for children with speech problems for 2 years.
Okay, now with your stuttering, did you feel that, because that brings up a lot of other issues, because you get bullied at school, you could get depressed about it, and you get teased. So did you experience any of that?
I can't really remember being bullied. I always was very fortunate. I always had a lot of good friends. When I say a lot of good friends, at different stages in my life, I had a small group of good friends. And for the first 2 years, basically for grade 2 and grade 3, I actually was in a school with all children with speech impairment. Okay. So they helped us especially. And then later on, I had really good friends, but I also think I was quite confident as a child. Right. And, having grown up with a single mom, and going to a special school, I actually had to make a journey every day of an hour by myself. I had to take the train or the bus, and then a tram, and then also an underground train. And so I was basically by myself all day long. I stayed in after-school care and then went back home, and we had a lot of fun on the way as well.
Yes.
We got up to mischief, as children now, and they left to themselves.
Exactly.
But so I think it actually built a lot of resilience into me. And I was always very strong, so I probably just overcame that. So to be honest, I cannot remember being teased. I'm sure it happened.
Sure.
But yeah, as I said, I had always really good friends, so yeah.
Okay, so then you went and you did your kindergarten training. And you continued to have your stuttering problem. How did you deal with all of that and within your training?
Yeah, that was really challenging.
And also becoming an adult with that issue.
Yeah, I think it was really challenging. As I got older, I became more and more aware of it. As I said, I had a really good friendship circle, what I just think is really important to have, because it really protects you a lot. But I did a lot of courses like rhetoric courses and things like that just to help myself, because since I was a kindergarten child myself, I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. Right. And I got told that I couldn't do it. But my mom was really good. She said, no, that's her dream. If she ever will work in that field, that will, we will find out, but she will do her education. And then I actually got a job straight after I finished. And then a short time later, I met God, and with that came healing into my life. So, yeah.
Okay, well, why don't you tell us about that encounter with God, because it sounds very exciting.
It actually was, it really changed my life. I was 18, had moved out of house. I lived around 100 kilometers away from home, just because that's where I found work. And one day when I went into Munich with the train, I saw a girl on the train, and she looked like an old friend of mine. But she had really changed, At first I thought, do I really approach her? And then it was like this little voice telling me, it doesn't matter if it's not her, in a city of 1.5 million people, really, if she's the wrong one, you just move on. So I walked up to her and I said, hi, Sabina, and it was her, but she just looked so changed. So we had a coffee together and we talked, and she told me about how she met Jesus and how he really changed her life and how she was free on drugs, off drugs and everything. And I thought, that's great for you, I was really happy for her. For myself, I probably didn't feel that need at the time, I believed in God, I believed in Jesus, I grew up in a Catholic home, and I always had that faith in Jesus. Mm. And I thought, I'm not on drugs, you know what I mean? I have a good life, I do what I'm happy with what I'm doing, I got a job that's fulfilling me, I got a lovely boyfriend, I got a great life. But, she kept on inviting me to church, and she sent me cards. And one day I thought, I better go, just to be, just to do the right thing. And I remember, running late because just the train was late when it arrived. And I walked into the church service, and the worship had already started. And it was just amazing. I remember literally walking down the steps, like just, like the first entry. And it was like a light bulb came up inside me.
Well, we're going to leave. We're going to stop for a break there. That's very exciting. We'll come back with more of Susanne's story. So we'll be back in a minute. I'm Nikki Cauchi, your host, and with me we're speaking with Susanne McQuie. Susanne, what was that light bulb moment?
It was really amazing. It's like, I just went down the stairs and I didn't even realize, that I didn't feel that light until it came up. And it was just really amazing, I must say.
So what exactly happened to you at that light bulb moment?
I think it started me on a journey, really knowing God, really knowing Jesus, because until that moment, I had known about him, growing up in a home, where there was faith. I heard a lot about him, but it was almost like your best friend, and I felt like I knew him because, I got so much told about him, but I didn't know him. And so then during the night I was speaking with one of the girls, and at the end I was actually quite happy but upset as well, because I realized it would be a big change to my life. I was just 18, I had a lovely boyfriend, had just moved out of home, freedom. And there, I just realized, that the life afterwards, would be different than before, because the Bible is very clear about, how we to live. And I remember crying and, as I said, being quite upset, and then just having the thought of, but if it's the truth, that's what I want. And that was the day that I committed my life into Jesus' hand, and really accepted forgiveness for my own lives and just started to trust him.
Wow. Now, you continued to have your stuttering problem. What happened with that once you became a Christian?
I think as God started to heal things in my life, because even I said, I was coping quite well with the stuttering. There are still other things that happen in your life, of course, and I think especially if you're a strong person, you don't always recognize what's actually happening, because you just soldier on.
Right.
But I found that God did a lot of healing in my life in lots of areas. And as he did that healing, my stuttering actually went. And so over a period of 3 years, I found that I could speak fluently. And that was first in German and then later on in English. So, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, I just want to go back to something that you said about, you had a good life, you're a good person. There are a lot of people out there that would say, I have a good life, I've never hurt anyone, I'm a good person, I don't really need God. Well, what would you say to them?
You know, what would I say? It's a really good question. Personally, probably I would say it's not about how good we are, but it's the amazing opportunities knowing the Creator, you know, that really made us, you know, the one that has a special plan for our for our lives. And actually, just after I got saved, I got a prophetic word, because I was saying to God, you know, what is my life all about? And I remember that word saying, you know, like that He will use me in the areas, you know, that I'm already involved in. And at that time I didn't understand, and later on I realized, you know, it was more and more to do with children. But yeah, you know, I just think it's an amazing opportunity, you know, of knowing the God who created everything. I mean, who doesn't want to know the person, you know, who is responsible for creating this wonderful world?
Exactly. So now let's talk about your husband. He's Australian.
Yes, he is.
So how did the two of you meet?
He actually, one of the ministers of his church here in Australia wanted him to get married. Okay. And he said there was no one, you know, even there were girls who liked him and things like that, but he just had nobody on his heart. And so he said, I look out for you. And he came to Germany quite on a regular basis.
Okay.
And the interesting thing was that around that time, I just had that sudden realization that my husband was in Australia. That my husband wasn't German. I just knew he was not in Germany.
Wow.
And I knew that he was English speaking. Even I got it wrong. I thought he was American. Never thought about Australia. And I also felt that his surname started with M. So yeah, so when that visiting minister came over to our church, he actually pinched a photograph of friends of mine and took it back to Australia.
Oh, wow.
So my husband started writing me. And so I received the letter from him with a picture of the photograph, because they wanted to make sure, you know, that I realized it was kind of like, you know, legitimate. And so we started writing. And over the next 10 months, we just continued writing. But I grew up realizing that, you know, if God has our whole lives in our hands, in His hands, then that also means marriage. So for me, I never dated from the moment I was 18 years old. By that time I was 27. Okay. And yeah, and I just was praying, you know, for God to show me if Malcolm was the right one. And he was doing the same as well. So we were not committed, you know, we were just friends, and we really wanted to know what God's plan was.
Well, that's just so great to know that God has led both of you together. So, you know, it has to last.
That's it, yes.
So now you've also got 3 children.
Yeah.
Ranging from 15 to 7, is that right? 2 boys and a girl. Now, you actually homeschool them.
Yes,
Now, homeschooling is actually quite big in the United States, but it's probably on the rise here, but not as big. So tell me how you came about deciding to be a homeschooler.
It was while I was teaching at a school, and I saw my kindergarten children going on to prep. And I just saw, you know, how little time they had with their families, how tired they were. And coming from Europe, you know, like all the children go home at lunchtime. And I wanted more for my kids. That was probably the first thing. And then I met families who homeschooled, and I saw the beautiful relationships they had. And then also, you know, like my son started reading very early. So by the time he would have entered school, you know, it would have been quite boring for him. So we were just looking at all the options, and also from the academic side, you know, just that the children can learn at their own pace. You know, if they're advanced, they can go ahead. If they struggle, you can help them. You know, there's not the competition out there. And they can just grow up to be the person, you know, that God has called them to be, with their, you know, with their strengths and with their weaknesses.
Susanne, you've had an amazing life, and I'm sure it's going to continue. Thank you so much for being on the show today. We'll be back after this break with our next guest. I'm Nikki Cauchi, and my next guest is Ursula Cettolin. Ursula, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Nikki. It's great to be here.
Now, Ursula, you are the worship pastor at Stairway Church in Vermont.
That's right.
Now, I know for a fact that's actually a large group of people that you have to lead there. Sure. What exactly is your role as a worship pastor?
Well, there's lots of things that I do during the week, like doing rosters for services for bands and musicians and arranging music. But for me, I guess the main thing I see that I do is find ways to connect people with God through music. That when people come together and they sing, which the Christian tradition has a long line of doing that in worshipping God, that they're not just singing songs, but they're actually feeling and sensing His presence through the music. And I think music is such a great connector for people. Everyone loves listening to music.
Yes.
So it's a great way to connect with God. So that's my aim.
Okay. So, but Ursula, you actually are an accomplished musician in your own right.
Thank you.
So you play the piano.
That's right.
You sing. You're a songwriter.
Yep.
And you've just released your first album,
Yeah.
which we'll talk about in a minute.
Thank
but
you.
where did all that musicality come from? Like, do you have a background in music from your family, or?
Yeah, kind of. My mum and dad both really love music, and I guess they really would have loved to have had more opportunities as children to learn to play. So when they had children, they made sure that we had piano lessons and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, they just wanted us to enjoy music, and so I think, you know, that was part of what we were encouraged in as children, but also I think God puts a special talent and gift in every person, and that, yeah, I guess I was really blessed that I had parents that allowed me to explore that and bring it out.
Now, Ursula, you just mentioned God. So tell me about your journey with God. Did you do you feel that God has got plans for your life with your musical talent? And when did you first come to know that, you know, I really want to believe in God and walk with Him?
Yeah. I guess for me, it doesn't feel like there's a real definitive moment. I mean, there's markers along the way, I guess, like baptism and things like that. But both of my parents actually had amazing conversion experiences. Like my mum saw an angel, and my dad, you know, felt like he heard God's voice, and they both really turned around and came to know God. I guess I grew up in that. So just seeing how they lived their life, and for me, God was always real. I always felt like I could talk to Him and that He was part of my life.
So now let's talk about your album. That's it. Titled Awakening.
That's right.
So Ursula, tell me, what was the inspiration behind this album, and why did you call it Awakening?
Yeah. Well, I guess in one part, I always wanted to do an album. I love writing songs, and I wanted to be able to share that with people, and for people just to see the journey that we go on in life and identify with that. But I guess more than that, the main theme for me around awakening was the thought that God's put things in each one of us that if we can be awakened to, our lives are just so much better. There's this great quote by Saint Irenaeus, which you might have heard, which says, "The glory of God is man fully alive." And I think, you know, if we can tap into those things, those talents and gifts that God's put into us, and use those, and also experience God and get to know Him, we're awakened. And I think God wants to do that for each person.
Well, that's a beautiful quote. The glory of God is man fully alive.
Yeah,
I love it.
It's great, isn't it?
It is. Now, where can people purchase this album?
You can buy it on my church website where I work, which is www.stairway.org.au, or you can get it on iTunes, or you can get it on Amazon. So there's a few different places.
Do you have a favourite song?
Such a hard question. I think if I had to pick one, I'd probably go with, there's a song in there called Here in Your Presence, and it's a simple worship song, but there's a point in there where we just let the music go, and, you know, the piano's kind of playing very harp, arpeggiated type figures, and there's a choir in the background humming, and to me it just reminds me of what it might be like in heaven, or what the throne room would be like. It really takes me there, so hopefully it does that for other people.
Well, I have to say, it is a beautifully put together album. I've listened to it many times, and we just love it in our family. Now, Ursula, I just want you to give a bit of advice to young musical people out there, and especially when TV is a huge influence in people's lives, and you've got shows like The X Factor, Australian Idol, Australia's Got Talent, and, you know, the main push in those shows to be famous, and not everybody makes it. So what advice would you give to those young people?
Yeah, it's a really funny thing, isn't it? I think a lot of my background's in singing teaching, and you see kids come in and they just want to be famous. That's their goal for singing. And in one way that's really great, because I think, you know, inside each one of us is this desire to be recognised, to be loved, to be celebrated for our accomplishments, and that's really great. But I think when you put all the emphasis on, if you become famous on stage, that's going to happen for you, it's kind of putting it in the wrong place. And I think if people can come into it actually knowing that they're loved, and knowing that they're loved by family and friends, but more importantly that they're loved by God, and finding their identity in that, rather than everyone's going to see me and love me and think I'm great, because we've all heard the stories of really famous people who are deeply unhappy, even though they seem to have everything. So I think if you can build on a good foundation, particularly of the love of God, then, you know, that's a great great place to follow your dreams from there.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Ursula. It's great to have you. We're going to finish with a clip of Ursula singing I Will Be Your Water. And I want to thank both my guests again, Susanne McQuie and Ursula Cettolin. From me, Nikki Cauchi. God bless you. Bye-bye.
And if you look around and the sun is going down, I'm gonna be there. Your answer in the dead of the night. You are my passion, my desire.